Hello, and welcome to the Santaland podcast. I created it just for you. I'm your host, Tony Felice, and each episode I'll read to you for 10 minutes, and then we'll talk about what we just heard. Like the cricket in my story, I'll guide you through a grown-up fairy tale, one that explores ideas of existence, identity, and the soul's journey through trauma, and the transformative power of love. By the end, you'll have heard my whole story, a sneak peek into the creative process of bringing a book to life. Maybe we'll read other books together. But for now, follow the wise cricket and discover the Santaland within yourself, a place of hope, connection, and peace that's already inside of you. This podcast is especially made for those like me who feel a little different and maybe talk about math at weddings or philosophy at funerals. And like me, maybe you have a loving husband or a wife or somebody else that loves you. If not, we're here to love you because you're in good company, my dear friends, here in Santaland. Hello, and welcome back to the Santaland podcast. We are on chapter 30, entitled The Emancipation of Wendy. Later that day, Tom told a story to David, sitting under the magnolia tree, the two of them just visiting the yard. They discussed Meredith's call and the likelihood that she would make good on her promise and actually show up. They also talked about independence and the growing desire to have no connections except friends and family, to move past business and calling, to exist quietly. They sat in silence, easy with older couples. "Did I ever tell you the story of Wendy's emancipation?" Tom said. "Yes," David said. "I've retold it myself hundreds of times," he said, chuckling. "Well, let me retell it in case I forgot something," Tom said. "I think I may have a place for it in my book." "Sure," David replied. So it was 1970-something, and my mother snapped. It had been brewing for a while. She had never really had a job before now, but she had started to do really, really well with real estate. People trusted her because she related to everybody. She could find common ground with a snail. Anyway, she'd been in the newspaper for some achievement, and my brother-in-law Carr had made copies and put them everywhere in the house. On the toilet seat, on a milk carton in the fridge, in cabinets, in her car. I mean, we found those things everywhere for weeks. "He is a scoundrel," David said. So I'm setting the tone here for my mom's growing independence of spirit. Well, it was summer, and Mom was killing herself in the garden outside, putting up tomatoes and a god-awful amount of zucchini. It was coming out of our ears. You get the point. Well, trying to satisfy my father, her clients, us, and take care of an overabundant crop of vegetables, she was exhausted a lot. She tried to keep up, but one day, all hell broke loose. My father had said, "The house is pretty dusty, and your green thumb looks like it's on vacation. All the houseplants are dying." Now, you have to understand that my stepfather bugged the shit out of my mother for years about those damn houseplants. For him, it was a running joke. For her, not so funny. Why he persisted, I have no idea. But on this one particular day, Mac had offered my mother one too many hassles about her green thumb, slipping one too many suggestions in the box too many times. And the growing feminist in my mother blew up at him. We, the children, were of course freaked out, and we immediately scattered to duck and cover. I mean, we scattered like roaches in every direction. But we stayed close, within earshot, of course. Who would miss out on this show, right? "Of course," David said. "Go on." On that day, my mother, Wendy, single-handedly dragged every houseplant, regardless of size, into the kitchen. Every jade plant, every Dieffenbachia, every false Aurelia, every snake plant was picked up, hauled upstairs if necessary, and deposited into the kitchen. To be watered? Nope. Instead, they were thrown over our second-story balcony with religious fervor. Let me picture this for you, hun. My mother was wearing a Foxy t-shirt my father bought her in Ocean City. She had a bandana holding her hair in place, and she was wearing those silly octagon glasses that were popular for a while. Anyway, Wendy huffed and puffed and hauled every plant up the stairs and down the hall to the kitchen. This is after shouting once, and only once, "You want houseplants? I got your houseplants right here, bucko. Do you hear me, bucko?" Ha, bucko. Wendy loved that word. Where does it come from? David asked. Hell if I know. Probably some 70s television show. She always quoted the corniest lines from television. We love that about her, especially when she mixed up the names. What the Price was really The Price is Right. The Saturday Night Fever show was really Saturday Night Live, that kind of thing. Anyway, the volcano had been brewing for about a year, so we, the kids, had to drill down. They usually fought in the living room or the kitchen, so we could hide against the wall to the kitchen or to the stairs leading up to the living room. And that time they were in the living room. We were hiding on the stairs in the corner of the foyer behind the giant ficus, straight as a board, 1, 2, 3, as well as my sister's best friend Jamie, who happened to be there. We stood against the wall, giggling, cheering her on silently with words like, "Yes, give it to him, Mama." And my brother, of course, drops the F-bomb, and we're shouting at him to be quiet, using the F-bomb to tell him to be quiet. David interrupted and said, "That's funny. Poor Jamie getting stuck with you three in the middle of all that drama." Tom replied, "She was mortified, trust me." Anyway, on this fateful and legendary historic day, my mother, Wendy Sanders, chucked every one of those houseplants over the kitchen deck onto the ground below, from the second story. About 12 of them sailed over the railing and into family legend. All of them? David asked. Yep. Big, small, tiny, half dead, joyfully living, it did not matter. She even went all the way down to the basement to drag the plants up the stairs, only to drop them from above. It was an apocalypse of houseplants and dirt flying everywhere. Somehow, she got them up those stairs, and when we offered to help, and we pleaded with her that everything was going to be okay, she shot us a look like we had never seen before. Her eyes were wild, and the energy of her filled the room. Her face read, "Do not interfere. I have business that has nothing to do with you kids." When it was done, there was silence. Change was afoot. We wondered aloud, but very quiet in whispers. We asked each other, what were they fighting about? What triggered her? When our hearts finally slowed to the rhythm of the air conditioner, we went down the stairs to the basement to look out the sliding doors to see the full carnage outside. We confirmed that every houseplant was out there. We waited about a half an hour, and then we quietly went outside and picked up every plant and put it back in its pot. 3 siblings and their friend put off squabbling for a day to silently bear witness to my mother's act of defiance. We knew her well enough to know that she would later beat herself up about it. She would later tell us that she did not know what came over her, but it was necessary to put her foot down. That's all she'd say. She could criticize our stepfather, but we could not. We had just come out of the 50s, for crying out loud, in the 70s. And at that time, it was less than 40 years from all that McCarthy bullshit. So women everywhere were shaking off the idea that they could not think for themselves. After that, Mac never bugged or teased her about things like that, instead choosing to tease her about things she did not do, out of fun, to keep the banter between them alive without the jaundiced eye of misogyny lording over their existence. My stepfather was, to a degree, a largely faultless fellow who was simply being a man of the times. But those times were ending, and my mother was heralding in that change. Her independence struck a chord with us that we carry to this day. It's a weird mixture of love and respect for both, and now, after all this time has passed, we can look more objectively at what happened and be so proud of our parents for evolving without killing each other or us in the process. They moved forward and they flourished. the way all couples do who respect one another. Deep down, where you feel it in your gut, in that space where you know that things are true or not. "Why did you think about this today, babe?" asked David. "I don't know. Maybe Meredith," Tom replied. Tom could not help but compare Meredith to his mother. True, Meredith filled in some of the gaps that Wendy could not. Wendy was very busy with 40 grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and her girlfriends when Tom was an adult. True to her name, Wendy floated across her life. Wendy, they called her. In adulthood, the real mothering was handed off to Meredith, and the fathering, and the eviscerating. Meredith was indeed a brilliant publisher. Her enemies called her the Queen of the Damned. David called her Queen Bee. Tom called her complicated. Please hold. Her fits, Meredith's, David turned them into a verb. A Meredith was his way of saying he'd lost his cool. "I had a Meredith at the market earlier," he'd say. "David, she told me honestly, Thomas, you won't even notice me. I'll buzz around the house with David and stay out of your hair and drink rosé on the veranda and keep you company while you're working." I said, "You're assuming I'm working." David smiled. Then she hung up on me. Pause. "By the way, have you noticed I changed the sound machine to Summer Night and it's all crickets and wind?" "I noticed, and I was wondering what's with the crickets," David asked. "I don't know. It brings me comfort. I've been sleeping really well lately. Maybe that cricket in the barn made me do it." They both laughed. I stood as still as a cucumber, but my smile was as big as the sea. So that was actually a very funny and very true story. But before we get into that, let me read chapter 31, entitled "Badger Me Once, Beg Me Twice." We were having a lovely morning on the back veranda when it happened again. Ring! "Hello, Meredith." Picking up from the conversation before, she said, "Tom, you're working when you sleep? Your mind never stops, so I'm not buying any of this bullshit. What's really happening? Do not, and I repeat, do not go all Truman Capote on me. Finish this work." Tom replied, "I don't know, Meredith. Maybe I am, though I don't drink, so I'm not as beatnik or Warhol Factory as all that." "What?" she said. "You know, turning falling apart into an art form," he replied. "Thomas, you've always been dramatic," she said. "Fine, Mare, but if you ask me one more deadline-related question, I'm going to send you home the moment you get here with all that wine from our house that you say that you hate." She said, "Don't threaten me with a good time, darling." Then hung up. There was no dial tone to greet him, like the old days. Just silence. Meredith had been threatening to visit for over a year. "Meredith is coming to the beach," he screamed out to the universe. Tom had turned from the door, leaned against the wall, and said silently to himself, "Finally." But that time, Meredith didn't come. Perhaps she should have. Chirp. Okay, a little foreshadowing there. But what do you think about that story about Wendy? That's the true story about my mom. My mother did have that experience in front of us as children. We loved every second of it. But we were scared shitless at the same time, I'll tell you that. Standing on the stairs, not knowing if our parents were going to get divorced. What did that mean? You know, that shit runs through your mind as a kid, even though it's only 1979. You know, and the Bionic Woman and the Brady Bunch is really, you know, your Friday and Saturday night, I guess. But it was the late 70s, and my mother was working a serious job, you know, where she was very well respected. And men could be very controlling back then. They wanted to know where you're going and what time you're going to be back and who's this and that. And, you know, it just got to a point, I think, where my mother, like all women, of her age and time said, no, nope, And my mother's act of rebellion, you see how interesting? It was one of the best PR stunts I've ever seen in my life. It was not a stunt. My mother was blind rage. She didn't even remember. She says she doesn't even remember doing it. She remembers fighting and she remembers about the plants, but she does not remember. So I guess it's possible for the mind to blank some things out, and I give her grace. Lord knows I blanked out a lot of terrible things myself. And who wants to remember? And I think that's really good for her, because for me, I'd eat myself up. I'd be doing it 30 years later. 30 years, I'd be thinking about how stupid it was for me to behave that way. And so I'm glad it didn't trouble her for at all. But she emancipated herself, and she threw every one of those plants over the deck. And us kids went and got it quietly and picked it all up. You know what it took for the three of us to do something together without bickering? But we did it. And I needed to put that in here. It also sets the tone maybe for what's coming, the Emancipation of Wendy. What else goes on? Let's find out. The plot's thickening. Thanks again for sticking around to the Santaland podcast. Bye now.